everyone. We're starting a new series today, and that is, how happy do you have to be on Shabbos? This is not just a philosophical question. This will be a halachic question, as we will see. And the question is there a mitzvah of simcha, a mitzvah of happiness on Shabbos? There's no question that there's a difference in halacha between what's called oneg, namely enjoyment, versus what we call simcha, happiness. There's a beautiful Gemara in Meseches Shabbos, Samich Bet, Omud Bet, that talks about a time not so positive for the Jewish people, in which the rabbis had to make an enactment to reduce their joy. They basically said like this: Kol midi itbe ta'anug ve'itbe simcha gazru rabbanan. If there's something that the Jewish people are doing that has both oneg, enjoyment, and simcha, happiness, we're going to make an enactment against it at that specific time. Aval midi itbe ta'anug ve'leitbe simcha. But if there's something that has in it enjoyment, like drinking a good, nice cup of a cold Coca-Cola on a hot day, avaleit be simcha, doesn't give you great happiness, lo gazer rabbanan, we won't make a gezerah against it. And indeed, halachically, the Rambam says that amongst the many mitzvot we have on Shabbos, there's two mitzvot called kavod ve'oneg, which is defined by the Gra as kavod, honor, meaning everything we do in honor of Shabbos, like clean the house and make the food, and oneg is what we enjoy on Shabbos. The Rambam adds that just like there's a mitzvah of kavod ve'oneg on Shabbos, there's also that mitzvah on Yontiv. Not the time now to deal with that chiddush of the Rambam, but the Rambam does add that on Yontiv, beyond kavod ve'oneg, there is another thing. That's called simcha. Shivat yamei HaPesach, u'shmat yamei HaChakim, shai yamim tovim, all the yamim tovim, chayav adam liot b'hem sameach v'tov lev, and eventually quotes the pasuk, v'samachta b'chagecha. So from this perspective, there's no question that there's a difference between oneg, enjoyment, and simcha, happiness. So is there a mitzvah of simcha on Shabbos? The Sifri, which is a midrash halacha on the Torah, says on the pasuk in Parshat Baha'alotcha that we read 2 weeks ago, that on certain days called Yom Simchatchem Mo'adechem and Rashei Chodshechem, you have to blow the chatzrotzrot and you'll be remembered before God. So we know what Mo'adim are, Yomim Tovim, we know what Rashei Chodashim are, but what are Yom Simchatchem? What are the days of happiness? Says the Sifri, Uve Yom Simchatchem, one opinion, Elu Shabbatot. These are the Shabboses. And indeed, the Baal Halachot Gedolot, the Bahag, who enumerates the 613 commandments, says that commandment number 47 is Simchat Shabbos, to be happy on Shabbos. And only in commandment number Memchet 48 does he say that there indeed is a mitzvah of Oneg Shabbos. The Tosfos comes along and says that during the week, if you want to make a Shever Brachas meal and say Shever Brachas, you have to invite what's called Panim Chadashot, someone that was not invited to the wedding, and you're inviting to the Shever Brachas. But, says Tosfos, you don't have to do that on Shabbos. Why? Because on Shabbos in and of itself is Panim Chadashot, because Marbin Lichvod Shabbat Besimcha Uveseuda, because you add anyway to your meal in Simcha and Seuda, in happiness, and Seuda, of course, would mean enjoying the meal. So, as we can see from the Tosfot, this probably is a mitzvah of Simcha on Shabbos. The Torah Temima, on his Perush of the Chumash in Bereshit, comes along and says for sure there's a mitzvah of Simcha because of this Sifri and another Sifri. Another Sifri in Parshat Re'eh says that it's strange that the mitzvah of V'samachta B'chagecha, to be happy on the holidays, it's written by Shavuos, it's written by Sukkot, but it's not written by Pesach. And the Sifri says it makes no difference. At the end of the day, any holiday that remembers the emergence from Egypt, there's a mitzvah of Simcha. So says the Torah T'mima that in the second time that the Torah mentions Shabbos in the Ten Commandments in Parshat Ve'et Chanan, it says that the reason for Shabbos is V'zacharta ki evet hayita be'eretz Mitzrayim, to remember that you were a slave in Egypt. And indeed, Friday night Kiddush is not complete without saying Zecher li'etziat Mitzrayim, remembering the emergence from Egypt. Thus, he says there's a mitzvah of Simcha on Shabbos, and he adds his own svara. He says that ultimately the Jewish people got the mitzvah of Shabbos before Har Sinai. And Har Sinai, there was a certain element of coercion, known as Kafa Aleim Har Kigigit, but there was no coercion in Marah, 3 days after they left the Sea of Reeds, in which God gave them a sprinkling of mitzvahs. One of them was Shabbos, and therefore, says the Torah Temima, that since Shabbos was given with just pure love, when a Yontiv and Shabbos come together, we add the word be'ahava to our davening. We don't just say Vatiti lanu Hashem Elokeinu be'ahava at the beginning of the sentence, but we end Zman whatever be'ahava mikra kodesh, because it was given with such love before Har Sinai. And indeed, says the Torah Tamima, it's known that any mitzvah that was given with love, the Jewish people continue to do with love. It's known, based on the Gemara in Shabbos, Daf Kuf Lamed Amud Aleph, Kol mitzvah shekibu Yisrael lahem b'simcha, adayin osim ota b'simcha. Any mitzvah that the Jewish people accepted with happiness, they continue to do with happiness, and therefore he says there's a mitzvah of happiness on Shabbos. However, not everyone agrees, as I said earlier. Indeed, in that Sifri, there's another opinion that B'yom Simchatchem does not mean Shabbos, but rather the bringing of korbanos every single day. So there's no mitzvah of simcha on Shabbos. The Sefer Hasidim comes along and says that there is a certain mitzvah of Simcha on Shabbos, but he limits it. He comes along and says, "Vayivarech Elohim et Yom HaShvi'i," God bless the seventh day. How did God bless the seventh day? He says, "Yesh lismoach b'Shabbos b'pekudei Hashem yishar mesamchei lev." You have to be happy on Shabbos by learning the one thing that should make you happy, and that is learning Torah. So there's no regular mitzvah of Simcha on Shabbos as there is on Yantiv, but rather there's a specific mitzvah to learn Torah on Shabbos. And indeed, the Ibn Ezra explains that pasuk Uvayom Simchatchem as any time the Jewish people are victorious over their enemies, like in Purim, they make a holiday, and if there was a Beis HaMikdash, they would blow the Chatzrotzros. And indeed, the Maharil says that even though you can't fast on Yontiv, it's a day of Simcha, you can fast on Shabbos if you have what's called a Tahanit Chalom, a bad dream, and you want to annul the dream, you can fast on Shabbos, because it gives you enjoyment to fast and hopefully annul the dream. Oneg didei demitpatel chalom b'ta'anitei. But you can't do that on Yontiv because beregalim ktiv simcha. Ve'ein simcha bebasa v'yayin v'lachin hasur litanot b'hem. So you can fast on Shabbos if need be. You cannot fast on Yontiv because Yontiv is a day of simcha in which you need to eat meat and drink wine, but Shabbos is not. And therefore, if need be, you have that bad dream, you can fast on Shabbos ata'anit chalom. The Tashbetz comes along and says that you can even give a hesped, a eulogy, on Shabbos theoretically, because the lo ashkechan de Shabbat ikrei yom simcha ela oneg ba'achila. It's a day of enjoyment of eating, but you can have enjoyment while eating, and then go to a hesped, hear a eulogy. Finally, Mahari Brona brings a story from the Mahari Vayel that was very upset that someone went ahead and did a pidyon on Purim. Because on Purim, and Harbev Simcha B'Simcha, you shouldn't mix up the Simcha of Purim with the Simcha of Pidyon Haben. Umizeh ein raya l'Shabbat. And don't tell me that you can't do a Pidyon Haben on Shabbos, because the Shabbos lo ikre Simcha ragonek. There maybe is a problem of handling money on Shabbos and doing that Pidyon Haben, but there's no problem of Simcha impinging on another simcha, simply because Shabbos is only a day of oneg and not of simcha. So at the end of the day, who cares? It's a day of simcha, not a day of simcha. We usually eat big meals. The bottom line is there is a nafkamina. What's the nafkamina? Yismechu v'malchutcha. That passage in which it says explicitly that the Jewish people are happy with Shomrei Shabbos v'korei oneg, the people that keep Shabbos are happy. Yismechu. Do you say it in all the davenings, or just in Musaf? If you say it's a day of happiness, then for sure you should say it in all the davenings, and that's what Nusach Sfar does, and many of the Sfardim. And it's not surprising that the Abu Draham says, Yismechu v'malchutcha, al shem u'v'yom simchatchem u'v'mo'andechem v'aminan b'sifri u'v'yom simchatchem elu ha'shabbatot. If we paskin like that first point of view in the Sifri, that Shabbos is a day of simcha, then you should say Yismechu v'malchutcha in all the davenings, Ma'ariv and Shachris. And if you say no, Shabbos, it's not a day of simcha, it's a day of oneg only, then you understand why you only say it by Musaf. By Musaf, you were in the Beis HaMikdash, and you're talking about the Korbanos, and when you're standing before God, that gives you great simcha. As Rav Soloveitchik said many times, simcha means standing before God. And ultimately, if the pasuk means, Uviyom simchatchem elu hatmidim, that it means the Korban Tamid, I can understand that when you stand in the Beis HaMikdash, you indeed have simcha, and therefore at Musaf, and only at Musaf, do you say Yismechu v'malchutcha, but not Friday night and Shabbos morning, because Shabbos ultimately is not a day of simcha. And indeed, the Shibbolei Haleket that I quoted earlier brought a point of view that says that in davening, you should say, at the end of that passage talking about Shabbos, the fourth bracha, v'yisbechu bahen kol Yisrael mekadshei shemecha. You should be happy with them, the Jewish people that sanctify your name, like we end on Yontiv, but brings an opposing point of view. And an opposing point of view is that you shouldn't say that. V'yeshomrim v'yanuchu lo Yisrael that the Jewish people will rest. Namely, it's not a day of simcha, it's a day of rest. It's a day of oneg, but simcha it is not. So we saw today that there's a big machlokes if Shabbos is a day of simcha or not, and this has ramifications on our davening. Do we say yismechu v'malchutcha in all the davenings? And do we say at the end of that fourth passage talking about Shabbos, do we say v'yismechu bahen kol Yisrael mekadshei shemecha? They should be happy, or no, only v'yanuchu bahen, they should rest.